All right, today we're gonna go over integrating arm training into like shoulder health or shoulder function work. So if I learned anything from my mentorship with Killian Hamilton, it's don't get advice on how to grow your arms from a guy with small arms. So this won't be necessarily a video about growing your arms, more so how can we sprinkle in painting the edges of shoulder function. So training shoulder flexion, shoulder extension, external rotation, internal rotation, looking at the scap, how we can get in different positions to put demands on shoulder stability and shoulder function as a whole. So talk about biceps a little bit as far as growing them, but mainly how to sprinkle these things in, how to kind of train shoulder health as well. We're looking at arm training and how it relates to the shoulder. Our biceps, triceps are all gonna attach to the scapula and to the humerus. So upper arm, shoulder blade, those are really what make up the shoulder girdle or the shoulder. So understanding we can get into some different positions and we can influence how they're gonna play a role in shoulder stability. So I think where like bodybuilders really get it right in terms of growing your arms is they do a lot of exercises that load the biceps really well. So like a lot of like straight bar stuff, a lot of heavy dumbbell work, a lot of feature curls, a lot of machine stuff. So they're getting a really strong mid-range position for the biceps where we can load it. And like if we were to only pick a couple exercises, we'd probably pick things that are in that mid-range, like those exercises that I just mentioned, because we're gonna put the most tension through our biceps. Ultimately, mechanical tension is what's gonna grow the biceps. But where that kind of does fail is that we're locking ourselves into a lot of like fixed modalities. So if we lack rotation at the shoulder, we're also going to get that rotation that we're lacking at the shoulder is probably going to get moved downstream. That's where we get like kind of elbow and wrist issues. When we don't get into this kind of like high cable position or this like low cable position, we're not really getting exposed to a lot of the function of the shoulder we can with arm training. So we're not getting like upper rotation of the scalp. We're not getting external rotation of the humerus. We're not getting like scapular depression, getting into shoulder extension. So we're not really putting a check on those things that we need for our shoulders to fully function, especially if we're not getting it in our training elsewhere. So if we're doing like a lot of mid-range pressing and rowing, we're also missing out on those from our other work. So for goals to grow the arms, a lot of mid-range stuff. Where we should sprinkle in some of this other stuff is more so from a shoulder function standpoint. So the other thing is if we lack the ability to express shoulder function or if we lack stability at the shoulder, we're not going to get meaningful output in this overhead position or in this shoulder extended position because stability is going to be the limiter. So we don't want stability to be the limiter. We can get to the point where stability is no longer a limiter on these exercises and we can train them for output. But in an ideal world, we pick maybe one of each of these things or a couple of each of these things to put throughout our program so that one, we're loading the biceps really well, but two, we're also testing and expressing shoulder function, making sure our shoulder can continue the shoulder things so that we can keep training, not have nagging injuries, etc. Starting out, one of my favorite cable variations for shoulder function is going to be this high cable curl. I like it because we can really train external rotation right here. We can train the serratus right here with this reach, get a little bit of up rotation of the scap, get a little bit of challenge to our rotator cuff in this scapular plane. What a lot of people are going to want to do is this elbow right now is facing straight back at the cable. Instead of that, their elbow is usually going to try to face in like this, smoke like shit, or they're going to be straight out to the side like that. We're going to get into the scapular plane because of where it fits into the rib cage. It's going to allow us to best express shoulder function. So looking at this arm training stuff in regards to the shoulder, looking at two main things, scap, humerus here in this high cable curl, we're getting exposure to shoulder flexion. So what I'm getting at the scap is going to be a little bit of upper rotation, a little bit of protraction. I'm getting active external rotation, and then I'm just trying to maintain that as I do elbow flexion. So my ability to maintain stability in this position, it's going to be pretty indicative of shoulder function. So another way we can get exposure to this overhead position, when I get into this overhead tricep extension, it's going to be a bit more passive as opposed to active stabilization from the high cable curl. So right now, this cable is kind of pulling me into external rotation. I don't have to do a lot to maintain this high elbow. If my shoulder is really lacking, it may want to drop down like that, but still trying to actively keep it in that scapular plane. We can set the cable up here to pull us into external rotation. Talking about like shoulder function, we're gonna look at this arc of shoulder flexion, shoulder extension. So can we get overhead? Can we get external rotation? Can we get into internal rotation and shoulder extension? So we kind of just covered this more upper arc, getting from the high cable curl, getting from the overhead tricep extension. Now we're gonna look at more shoulder extension, getting into this position back here. So my favorite way to do that is getting passively pulled into it. A lot of people will get pseudo shoulder extension. So they're going to get shoulder extension, but their chest is going to kind of stay down, and you'll see this scap kind of roll over top. So if we can't create space, if we can't get the shoulder blade to move back, we can't get this chest to get up and get some expansion to these front muscles right here, like our pec, then we're not going to get true shoulder extension. Usually people who get like anterior shoulder pain are going to get in the shoulder extension and kind of look like this. So getting passively pulled here, learning what this position is. I love the low cable curl. Make sure these weights are the same. I like this as well. Same premise for the dumbbell incline curl, but we can scale this to the degree of shoulder extension that we have. If I really lack shoulder extension, I can stay closer to the cable. If I really want to challenge a bit more, take a big step forward here. What we're going to be looking at from the standpoint of maintaining position is kind of as a reference point, our scap not rolling over, our chest being able to come up. So look right here. Can I maintain this position as I curl with my elbows staying stationary? So I don't want to see me going into shoulder flexion too as I curl. I should stay back. My scap shouldn't roll over. I should be able to maintain that nice depressed position. Low cable curl, dumbbell incline curl. We're getting more passively pulled into shoulder extension, right? The weight is pulling us into this position. So if we really suck at getting there, it's gonna help to open that space up. This cross body tricep extension, or even on the dip down here we'll get into, it's more of an active challenge to maintain shoulder extension. So as I kind of get, I'll start with this side. As I pull back here, the load is actively pulling me into shoulder flexion, so I'm resisting into shoulder extension. So this is gonna be a bit more challenging towards maintaining that position. The same premise, chest up, shoulder blades down. I'm not worried about getting retracted shoulder blades. I just don't want them to be forward. I want to clear space for me to actually get into shoulder extension, get some internal rotation. Same idea, shoulder shouldn't roll forward, pushing scaps down, and my elbow shouldn't come forward too. So trying to maintain the elbow position back, getting pure shoulder flexion, shoulder extension. Let's do a set with actually loading it. One last thing. On these, getting into the shoulder extended position, we're not gonna be able to get the best shoulder extension from like an arm training standpoint with like an adducted arm. So we wanna get kind of elbows flared just a little bit. That's gonna give us the most space to actually get into shoulder extension and train elbow flexion, elbow extension. From a like mid-range perspective, we're thinking mainly hypertrophy, most loadable position, kind of this elbows either by our sides to somewhere in this kind of range of like 60 degrees of shoulder flexion. They like a pre-show curl, but this doesn't mean that we're not challenging shoulder function at all. You'll see with like a lot of beginners or even like intermediate trainees as they curl, they either one have the ability to not let their elbows come into shoulder flexion, or you'll still see these shoulders like tipping around a little bit as they curl. So it's going to be like a trade-off or like a sliding scale of, you know, challenging output versus challenging function. As we get into more of these like unstable positions, we're going to be challenging more of like function, stability versus training output. As we gain the ability to maintain or express function, you know, express stability, whatever you want to call it, we can train more output there. But also, let's not just say that this is not going to be challenging of shoulder stability at all. Someone who's like very new to training or somebody who just lacks shoulder function in general, like that's still going to be a good place to start getting awareness of the shoulder, training our arms here. All right, so closing up, if our goal is hypertrophy, we're going to get mainly that stimulus from our mid-range work. But from a shoulder health, shoulder function standpoint, arm training really should be synonymous with shoulder function. So getting exposure to overhead or shoulder flexion, we can use high cable curl. We can use overhead tricep extension. We can use that to either pull us into or challenge external rotation, a little bit up rotation of the scap, get challenged to stability using a rotator cuff to stabilize your shoulder and overhead. Shoulder extension, we can use a low cable curl, we can use a dumbbell incline curl, we can use a cross body tricep extension, we can use a dip. Challenging shoulder extension, making sure that we're getting true shoulder extension, that we're not getting pseudo shoulder extension, but we can sprinkle those in as a way of putting either a check on shoulder function, make sure we're maintaining it, or improving it if we lack it. That's a way of adding in something other than that mid-range work to, one, make training shoulder function less boring, but two, still get a good bicep stimulus, making sure first, though, check the box of stability, check the box being able to actually express function at that position. So if we're limited in our ability to create stability, we're limited in output, but at some point, stability is gonna be the goal until we kind of maintain that point, or we kind of reach the point where we actually have it. Then we can train output in those positions as well. So it's not like this is purely shoulder stability. It isn't like this is like, you know, purely output. There's just a kind of a gradient there between the two. Sprinkle these in where you see fit. Still do your mid-range work. That's your main meat and potatoes work. Don't get too caught up with like, oh, short in position, length in position, length in position. Think of it more from the lens of like shoulder function. Hit your mid-range stuff. Sprinkle this in. Get juicy, stay healthy. That's it.